Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this, the final session of our day today. And today's been wholly devoted to social care, and indeed the final session of our week of events. I'm delighted that you could join us, whether that means you're returning from previous sessions or you're brand new to this one, to our final session, Positive Disruption Through Story. Dawn Evans. I'm delighted to welcome Dawn. Dawn is the project manager for the Swift Replacement Programme at Perth and Kinross. This session will consider service users' experience of receiving council care support services, exploring user research and journey mapping to inform design as part of the current Swift Replacement Programme at Perth and Kinross Council. And Dawn's going to share some of the lessons that she learned in that process and how we provide services to people receiving support, how we think about outcomes and the profound impact of procurement and commissioning on people's lives using real world examples. So I'm going to hand over to Dawn and Dawn can take us through our presentation. Thanks, Dawn.
Thank you. Thanks. Can you still see the slides on the screen? Yeah. Okay. Ooh.
Hi, Dawn, are you still there?
Yep.
Going a bit quiet. I thought I was just making sure you were still okay.
Is it not playing for you? Right.
And we tested it and it worked, but we're not hearing anything just now.
There we go.
No. Gosh, it worked 5 minutes ago. This is typical.
What are you getting?
Just silence.
Really? Oh dear.
Must be maybe different rules when you've got a lot of people.
Right, let me try something else. If it fails, I'll do my best to read it instead. Right.
So everyone, poor Dawn's suffering a bit with tonsillitis, so she had kindly pre-recorded her slides and our presentation today, and we did test it just before you all joined us, and it worked fine. But now it doesn't, which is just typical on a Friday afternoon.
Right. Now I've got several screens open here, so just give me a sec.
Yeah. You do what you need to do.
Julie, what do you have on your screen just now?
I can see your slides and I can see your other slides down the side.
Okay.
Your first slide.
And now?
Same. Oh, no, just your first slide with no other slides down the side.
Okay, I'll press the audio. Give me a thumbs up if you hear it.
Okay. No, it's not working, I'm afraid.
Okay.
What are you doing? What a shame.
Right. Sorry, everyone who's waiting. I need to slightly reorganize myself. We did test this, but right. Quite sure what to do now because the audio is going to play on all the slides.
Oh, of course. But we might not. Oh, you'll hear it, but we won't hear it.
Yeah.
Which could be a bit disturbing for you.
Right.
So at the moment I can see you, Donna. I know you've stopped sharing it just now.
Yeah, I'm just going to launch it again so I can open a different screen and see my script.
Okay. The best laid plans.
I know. Okay. Right.
So I can see
So have you got my
your first
slide
slide.
now? Yeah. Okay. Okay, let's try this. I'm sorry about the audio. So yes, good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me to speak today. I hope everyone can see and hear the slides okay. As I said, I do have a bit of tonsillitis, so I will do my best to get to the end. I hope there's time at the end for your questions as well, but please take note of any that you have throughout and post them in the chat, and I'll be happy to answer them at the end. Next slide. You see that okay?
Yeah.
So I'm going to introduce myself first. My name is Dawn Evans, and I'm currently the project manager for the Swift replacement programme at the Perth and Kinross Council. I've included my LinkedIn and email address on here if anyone wants to get in touch afterwards. Before this project and my life within the business improvement team, my background included 20 years experience in social care across a variety of different sectors. I've worked in the third sector for mental health services, drug and alcohol and homelessness services, and within local authority adult care services. As a social worker, as a senior practitioner, and lastly, for my sins, as a team leader for Perth City. I've also worked within engineering and manufacturing environments as an engineering technician, which is maybe a bit of an odd career mix. But I learned many skills in Six Sigma and lean management principles, process flow mapping, process redesign, root cause analysis, streamlining and quality control, which have all become really very useful in my project management role, redesigning our social care management system. For those who may not be aware, Swift is the case management system our social care staff use at Perth and Kinross, and which we'll soon be replacing. As part of this exercise, we're taking the opportunity to reimagine and redesign how we deliver services to our service users and how we support our workforce to do their jobs, where the system that they use should be an enabling tool rather than a barrier. But I'll speak more about this project and some of the service design principles we're using a little later in the presentation. So a brief outline of today's session. In this session, I'll explore some contrasting experiences directly from service users receiving support services provided by the local authority, a small piece of user research analysis around each service user's care journey. I'll look at how outcomes were assessed, what outcomes were achievable within the scope of how outcomes are currently measured, and what services were available to meet these outcomes with some lessons learned. The session will also explore some active user research and journey mapping using different service design tools from the Scottish Approach to Service Design Playbook as part of the current Swift replacement programme at PKC. I'll share with you what we are hearing and learning from our service user groups and our workforce throughout this process about how we provide services to people receiving support. And finally, some future thinking. This session will also consider ways in which we can continuously build on best practice examples across Scotland, supporting health and social care partnerships and third sector to make data-driven decisions and cost-effective design solutions towards more holistic, successful support services. The aims of the session are to remind ourselves and bring into focus the profound impact of procurement and commissioning on people's lives using real-world examples, to broaden our understanding of service design principles and what user research looks like and can help us achieve, and to begin to think differently about outcomes, why we measure what we measure, why this is changing, and what we need to do differently moving forward as a result. This is Dorothy. Dorothy became a client of mine after her GP had referred her for a social care assessment due to her struggling to manage at home with personal care tasks, meal preparation, and medication administration. When I met Dorothy, she was 83 years old, living in a small local authority house within Perth City. Dorothy had a variety of health conditions that were affecting her quality of life and had severely limited her independence. She had dense left-sided weakness as a result of a stroke, which had impacted her ability to safely mobilise. She had peripheral neuropathy in her hands and feet, which further impacted on her ability to use walking aids, as she couldn't properly grip the walker or feel the ground underfoot. She also had arthritis in her fingers and hands, which added to this issue as she experienced a lot of joint pain. Dorothy also had COPD, which for her meant that any attempts to walk must be done so slowly due to her breathlessness, as well as needing support to manage this safely. In addition, Dorothy also had diabetes, and as she had been struggling with preparing meals, she had not been maintaining her diet and was suffering the effects of this in both weight loss, weakness and fatigue, and in maintaining healthy blood sugar levels. It had been the latter which had brought her to the attention of social services after an incident at home where Dorothy had had a fall and had lay for some time before a neighbour heard her calling for help. Her GP had made a referral to adult care as a matter of urgency to support her to remain safely at home. What struck me when I met Dorothy and I talked with her in her home was not all of her health issues, but just how isolated she was. Dorothy was a widow. She and her husband had never had any children. She had no other immediate family and only an estranged sister in Australia whom Dorothy didn't know was still alive. She had few, if any, friends, most sadly having passed away, and her neighbours didn't really get involved with one another. Her health was failing, and when we talked about the type of outcomes she had here, we were able to construct a package of care that would address many of the risks and issues associated with her health. I was able to put a package of care in place that included support to safely wash and dress each morning and had installed the right equipment in our home to help with this. A toilet frame, a shower seat, handrails, and so on. Breakfast and medication support, lunch and evening meal support, and finally an evening visit to help her dress for bed and take her medication were all put in place. Her outcomes around very practical tasks were fairly straightforward to put supports in place for via an SDS Option 3 package arranged for her by the local authority on her behalf. I reviewed the progress with Dorothy as supports were introduced, and initially Dorothy seemed bright and happy about these. But when I reviewed Dorothy after a few weeks of receiving these supports, she told me how lonely she was and how really the only thing she had to look forward to were the carers coming in, most of whom she liked and said they were very kind to her, but she commented on how busy they are and how often she felt quite rushed. There was no time to chat, and she explained that she felt processed and left. When she began to cry, I sat with her quietly for a while, made her a cup of tea, and eventually she told me that she had asked her carer one morning if she could please be helped to sit at the breakfasting table at the rear of the house, where she and her husband used to eat together, instead of being parked in front of the TV with a tray table in the front room. She said that it was sunny in the kitchen in the morning, and as she didn't get to go outside very often anymore, she wanted to feel the sun on her face and watch the birds outside. So I asked Dorothy what happened. Dorothy told me that the carer responded by saying she didn't have enough time to support her to the kitchen. Mobilising for Dorothy took a very long time, and there wasn't enough time in the visit to wash, dress, eat, have medication, and to walk to the kitchen. So we talked about whether she could be supported to sit in the kitchen via a wheelchair transfer, but Dorothy wanted to eat at the table, sit in the sun and watch the birds, and build her strength and confidence with walking and to feel a little more independent because, as she told me, she had a plan. Dorothy's plan went beyond watching the birds from her window. She told me that she hoped she could get back to the bowling club at the local park. She wanted to walk around the green and sit on the bench that she and her husband used to sit on and watch a game of bowls. When I asked Dorothy what else she wanted to achieve and what her real outcomes were, she said that she'd like to make a friend and share a cup of tea and a chat with someone who wasn't paid to talk to her. Now, I'm not going to lie, my heart just broke for Dorothy, so I was on a bit of a mission. But just as Dorothy had said, the care provider stated they couldn't support with helping Dorothy mobilise to the kitchen as there was not enough time in the visit to do this. Dorothy even volunteered to forego getting washed, dressed, or eating if it meant that she could use the time instead to practice walking to the kitchen and watch the birds out the window. But this was not an appropriate trade-off, either morally, ethically, or medically in Dorothy's case. It was vital that her skin integrity be preserved and her personal hygiene maintained daily. And due to her diabetes, she needed support with her diet rather than to be missing meals. I tried to adjust the care package, of course, and increase the time of the visit, but this was declined due to the maximum personal care and meal visit combination of tasks not being authorised for over 1 hour, unless I could prove enough risk for discretionary approval. But even then, it became an issue with the provider's capacity to offer this length of visit, which they could not. I made referrals to physio for support in building her confidence with mobilising, and I made several referrals to befriending schemes such as WRVS, and I reached out to the local church and even to the bowling club itself to inquire if any volunteer members might be able to support. Dorothy and her hopes were on several waiting lists while the care package continued. What we were able to provide Dorothy improved her safety at home, and we installed equipment and technology. We provided personal care and meal visits. We maintained her health and her existence. But these weren't really her outcomes. These are the types of outcomes that we can more easily measure and find supports to satisfy. But as I look at these pictures, and I'm sure it's the same for you, what she wanted to achieve was warm and colourful and full of connection and memory. But what we delivered was quite sterile and cold pieces of metal, and to be frank, a failure to address a profound sense of loneliness. I needed to make referrals to charities, churches, and schemes to try and find ways for Dorothy to meet her quality of life outcomes. Due to the demand on these types of services, none were able to quickly produce supports for her. I wish this story had a happier ending, but sadly this is where Dorothy's story ended. She was able to get to the kitchen eventually to eat her breakfast, but she never did get to the bowling club or to make a friend and share that cup of tea and a chat. Dorothy died in hospital several months after we met. I arranged her funeral and I sorted out her affairs as there was no family or power of attorney in place. I attended the funeral and there was myself, her main carer from the home care agency, and one neighbour who'd sometimes put her bin out for her. Out of the 3 people who attended Dorothy's funeral, 2 of us were paid to be there. 7 months after Dorothy passed away, I got a phone call from WRVS that they had capacity to begin supporting Dorothy. The availability at that time of services able to offer more holistic supports was and still is a massive issue for people like Dorothy, who sadly we see much more of in social care. This is Elizabeth. I met Elizabeth at 99 years of age, and she very quickly told me that she was busy waiting for her letter from the Queen. Elizabeth was a very bright and cheerful lady, even though her health conditions had limited her independence somewhat. She struggled with transfers and she had lost much dexterity in her hands, and the arthritis she had in her shoulders limited her range of movement. She also had a blood pressure disorder that would sometimes cause collapse and endanger her from injury incurred through falling. Elizabeth was also a widow. However, she had 3 adult children, 11 grandchildren, and 6 great-grandchildren. She lived in a close-knit village community, and as I often found in my fieldwork days, those in cities tended to be more isolated and lonely for connection, despite their proximity to services, than those in more rural areas where community still meant looking out for your neighbours. Alongside her large family, many of whom she was able to see at least monthly when they would visit from Glasgow, Aberdeen and Inverness, Elizabeth had a good group of close friends and neighbours around her. Though she was 16 years older than Dorothy, she looked a similar age. Her bright spirit and full life had given her a buoyancy that sadly Dorothy had lacked. Elizabeth had some basic needs and outcomes to meet, many of which were around practical elements of managing safely at home. As she led me around her home, I noted types of equipment and adaptations that were required to support her. Elizabeth asked for and wanted very little in the way of carers visiting. She needed a new bath hoist, a twice-a-week carer to help with the bath, a replacement toilet frame, some bilateral handrails, falls detector, comm alarm, and a few gadgets like long-handled sponges and pickers. Her meals were supported locally, her friend took her shopping weekly, and she had help with her housework and garden privately arranged by her family. I talked with Elizabeth for some time about other supports that she could benefit from, with the memory of Dorothy still with me. Concerned for Elizabeth's supports, I asked her if she'd ever been to a day centre or if she'd like to go. But Elizabeth laughed at me in the nicest possible way. She asked me if I'd ever been to one of our day centres and promptly told me that playing volleyball with a balloon sat in a riser recliner chair was not her idea of fun. She told me, and I quote, "Those places put years on you, and let's face it, I can't really afford that." She had a great sense of humour, so we laughed as I asked her what she does do for fun and how she manages to get out and about and see people. Well, Elizabeth had a better social life than I do. She loved to play mahjong and had started somewhat of a mahjong frenzy in her village, and all of her friends had a set and they'd take turns hosting games in one another's houses each week. Over these games, they formed a lunch club of their own. They'd each put money in a kitty and order platters of sandwiches from Clark's. And then came the bucket lists. Each of them had a little list of things that they'd love to get out and do, so they made it happen. They'd pick out one out of the bowl each month, and one of Elizabeth's daughters would help make the arrangements as necessary. She told me the kinds of things they do together, hiring a minibus to take them to Arbroath for some proper fish and chips down at the harbour, or to Carnoustie for ice cream, going to the theatre or to a botanical garden in a different town for lunch. And her last trip had been to the Edinburgh Tattoo. But above all else, Elizabeth loved spending time with her great-grandchildren and telling them all about her life and hearing their stories. Elizabeth's health could change quite quickly, so she remained a client of mine for some time for continuity of care and urgent referrals. I knew her case extremely well and was able to quickly adjust her package of care to increase or decrease visits as needed. Elizabeth said she felt safer with me in the background somewhere, and she'd usually get me to peg her washing out or put the kettle on whilst I was there to visit and assess her changing needs. But over the years I knew Elizabeth, I became very fond of her. Elizabeth got her letter from the Queen, and she very proudly showed me during a review visit. She welcomed 2 further great-grandchildren to her family, and she continued enjoying her outings and adventures until 103 years of age. When her daughter called me to tell me the sad news of her passing, she invited me to the funeral as a celebration of Elizabeth's life and wanted to thank me for what I had done over the years. I attended, but when I arrived, it was standing room only in a very full church. And I couldn't help but note the difference in how these ladies' lives had ultimately ended so differently and reflect just on why. These are just 2 cases from literally hundreds that I could tell you about, but they both encapsulate differently the message I've been invited here to speak about. Cookie cutter services, home care style delivery models that are replicable here, here, and here are necessary for certain elements of a person's support and safety and in helping to maintain and manage certain risks, but they are often not the most needed or wanted types of supports or those which have the most profound and positive impact on a person's quality of life. Both Dorothy and Elizabeth needed practical assistance, which could be offered through carer visits and equipment, but they both wanted connection in their lives, relationships, family, company, happiness, purpose, community. Elizabeth had many of these things in spades, and she lived happily to 103. But Dorothy had few, if any, personal resources or protective factors in her life of this nature, and it had been impossible to source supports like this for her at the time. The outcomes I was asked to measure as a social worker focused primarily on delivering practical supports, tasks around hygiene, meals, medication, the types of things we already had services on the menu to meet. And that's unfortunately the route that many practitioners are funneled down. And I think sometimes systemically we fail to see or address the bigger picture. Is it because we don't know how to measure more intangible outcomes like happiness or purpose, or measure and record and guard against risks like loneliness or sadness? Or is it because we don't have enough services in place geared towards meeting these types of aims? Thankfully, there's a growing desire across health and social care to develop more efficient and person-focused services that are fit for the modern age in which we live. Currently, the reality is that for many people, navigating or receiving support with care needs can be extremely complex, with processes and services often designed around the needs of organisations and not the people using them. The services we provide to people should be based around their needs so that the advice we give and the support that is provided serves to assist people during what can often be very challenging and difficult times. Service design is about working with users to better deliver, better services. A growing number of public and private sector organisations are using this user-led approach to rethink how services are shaped and delivered. At Perth and Kinross Council, we're using service design principles to help us redesign and build new systems and processes that not only better support the workforce to carry out their duties more effectively and efficiently, but our main goal at the centre of our project is to improve the experience of our service users and better develop the way that we deliver services. I'm sure you might have already heard and seen a lot throughout the week relating to service design, so I'm just going to quickly flash up some images of methodologies and tools often used. I find them really stimulating and thought-provoking, but I'm going to focus more on what we've been doing in my team with our stakeholder groups in our project redesigning our social care case management system, using the service design principles I learned when completing the Scottish Approach to Service Design Champions course and through studying Insights to Innovation with the Duncan and Jodison College of Art and Design. And these tools for us at the current stage we're at are namely user research and journey mapping. I followed the Scottish approach to service design closely, and there's a ton of great resources on the Scottish Government website for service design for local authority services. In the past, they state that government projects used to start with policy and legislation and were worked out through system requirements and procurement. That there may have been a bit of usability testing near the end of the project, but too little and too late to have any significant impact. The best example, as they say, the user needs have been at the heart of the project and the user research started on day one. So within the Swift replacement programme, we've embraced this from the start. The insights gathered from the user research have given the entire team a very deep and empathetic understanding of their end users and let us see which features are most important in delivering value to our end users. This is just one example of a journey mapping template that we've used. It helps focus the conversation on target users, their needs and their pain points to give us the sharpest possible insights to work with. We've used various methods to expose problems and design opportunities and find crucial information to use it in our future design process. This type of research aims to uncover the barriers or the frustrations that users face as they interact with products, services, or systems, and focuses on the feelings, thoughts, and situations that users go through as they interact with services and systems. With this example, we spoke to service users, carers, and family members and asked them things like, how did they come to know that they needed support from social care services, and how did that make them feel? We asked if they had enough information up front or if they needed to do more research on their own and whether they could find what they needed easily. We asked how they were contacted or got in touch with services and how that felt. Was it easy or repetitive? Could they reach who they needed or were they transferred several times, for example? When the service was in place, we asked how this felt, how well informed they were, how many workers they'd seen, or the same worker throughout their assessment journey. If the paperwork they received was easy to understand or to read, was it accessible? And how they felt about the content of their assessment, whether they felt it reflected their views and their circumstances. How much would they like to have contributed to this themselves or differently? We asked as they progressed in their care journey if they knew what to expect or who would be in touch with them next and why. How easy it felt to communicate back with us if things were not going as planned, and what their preferred methods to do this might be and to look like. And if, when the services stop, how this process felt and what suggestions or recommendations they might have to improve this. With the Swift replacement programme, we have two sets of users to consider. the practitioners who are using the system that we're redesigning, but of course the service users that they are working with to support. So not only did we journey map with our service users, but with our workforce as well, across many of the same processes and situations that they mutually face, albeit from different sides of the table. And what was really interesting was plotting the pain points and good points of these processes, and then comparing them across the worker and the service user's experience. Now, it's a little messy, but hopefully you can see on the far left and again on the far right how these comparisons started to look. Our aim was to focus primarily on resolving the service users' pain points and in not losing the aspects of the current experience that work well for them, but at the same time to develop ways to improve the staff experience of the same process, to improve efficiencies and reduce the time spent on the system, to keep the positives and resolve the bottlenecks without costing the end user's experience, and to really understand what's underneath these good and bad points, with the very annoying 5 whys that I have driven my team bonkers with for the past 18 months. But I find that you usually get closer to the truth on the 5th why is that than the first 4. Through this process, we've been able to construct what our system specification needs to look like and what our future processes need to include or exclude. And we'll use this to evaluate the providers through the next stage of our process towards selecting our preferred system. We are using evaluators from our workforce and our client groups to do this, making this a practitioner and service user focused solution rather than perhaps what would have been more of an IT orientated preference. So why is any of this important? Well, because how we measure what we measure is changing, and we need systems and services in place that will be able to support these types of outcomes to be achieved. Our case management system needs to be flexible and future-proofed for the changing landscape of social care, and we need different kinds of services available to help us meet these changing outcomes. In line with the new SDS national standards, the Adult Social Care Review, our national health and wellbeing outcomes, and in understanding different toolkits such as ASCOT that can be used to collate qualitative data such as quality of life indicators into quantifiable measurable forms, we're shifting the measure of outcomes to focus on quality of life, things like happiness, loneliness and fulfillment, or having a purpose. That it means we must evolve the type of services we commission to meet these types of outcomes. And these evolved services need to be designed with users for users, and the marketplace stimulated to meet this demand, moving away from more traditional home care style delivery formats. This is an extract from the Independent Adult Social Care Review, which I'm sure you'll all be familiar with. Hopefully you can see here also many of the themes identified from the stories that I've told you, or the work I'm currently involved with in redesigning how we do what we do. What needs to change, and to remind ourselves why we do it. And finally, some future thinking. I did some work with LIST and NSS before I started in this role, and I delivered a presentation to their annual gathering of analysts. And from here, we began tossing ideas around about how we could use local health data in improved ways to help build on best practice and improved services and outcomes. The question was, if, for example, comparative local authorities with similar demographics and geography could compare and learn from one another's health and performance monitoring data, what improvements could be made to services? So if, for example, we accept that Aberdeenshire and Orkney are comparative local authorities to Perth and Kinross, and let's say Aberdeenshire have vastly reduced their delayed discharges from hospital or managed to suddenly increase the successful uptake of technology-enabled care, we could look to model after these initiatives in place within that local authority and replicate it in ours. I'm oversimplifying, of course, but hopefully you get the idea. If the transmission of a particular disease, for example, is suddenly far less in one area than another, we can examine the mitigating factors and services in place and transpose them to other areas to benefit from. I also spent quite a lot of time in and about the Nesta service directory for England and Wales. This is where participating local authorities uploaded their service pathways and implementation structures online to be shared or viewed by other local authorities. So if Liverpool City Council wanted to change how they deliver types of home care, for example, they could access the service directory and look at the maps that other local authorities use, be able to pick one up and implement it without starting from scratch, so to speak. So if you could combine a consortium of local data labs with a national service directory for Scotland, you can hopefully see how powerful and useful this sharing of data and practice could be. If one area's drug-related death health stats, for example, suddenly dropped, and this was found to be due to the introduction of new services, with effective intervention results detected via the data lab, we could access the information in the service directory and replicate or build upon the success of those services in our own local authority area. If we were able to use this type of data to drive our improvement and development activities for health and social care and third sector development in a collaborative way across Scotland, working together collectively with service users, we can design services that meet service user needs locally and share these with neighbouring authorities to adopt or adapt, continuously improving with user research and service design and development at the centre. Lastly, being honest, this isn't a quick fix, and good user research supporting service design does take time and a little patience to do properly. However, the research tells us that for every £1 you spend on design, you save £100 on delivery and reworks and fixes at the other end, which, when we consider public monies and finite resources, not only does it make for a cost-effective and sound investment, we save capacity in our stretched services and systems, and the people using services achieve better outcomes and improve their quality of life. I'll leave you with a nice, positive, disruptive quote from the head of user research at the government digital service that's always handy to use in defence of things like, we don't have time or money for user research, we just need something quick. And that is that they remind everyone that to really waste time and money, all you need to do is build a service that nobody wants and nobody can use. Thanks for listening, and I hope there's time for questions.
Yeah, we're running slightly behind time, but we've still got quite a fair number here. I've got a bit of echoing going on. I'm hoping it will settle. Dawn, that was great. Well done. I can only imagine how sore that was for you with your throat, having pre-recorded the whole thing. So doubly thanks from me. It was particularly emotional, the stories that you shared, and some of the comments have been fantastic, and you should have a look. People are really...
Definitely. I haven't, my phone's been buzzing away, which I'm assuming is...
The comments, you've really hit the mark, and I know you were worried at the start about whether you were going down the right route, but people have really enjoyed it, and saying that this has reminded us all why we do the jobs we do, and so on. It's interesting. We had a speaker, and I've lost track of the days, but one of the days, and I asked him to reflect back. It's nothing to do with care; it's to do with serious organised crime, and I asked him to reflect back on the 10 years that he'd been involved, and I said, what do you think the greatest failing, or what was your greatest learning? And he said, we don't move fast enough. And when you were talking about Dorothy, I was thinking there was never a greater case for us moving fast than the case of Dorothy, that's sitting waiting and just wants to go to a local bowling club or out for an outing, Actually, and someone said in the chat, one of our team has said, how would I get involved in helping older people that are lonely, which I thought was really nice as well. Do we have any questions? I don't see questions in the chat. There's lots of positive, supportive comments. Would anybody like to raise their hand and ask a question of Dawn while we've got her here? Everyone's gone very shy.
Sorry if the stories were a little bit too depressing.
No, we expect them to be realistic, so it's fine. Well, I don't think we've got any questions from what I can see. I'm just double checking the messages. Just everybody saying how much they enjoyed it. And it's the first time I've seen a heart coming up, Dawn, so that a wee heart came up, and I didn't even know you could do that, so whoever did that, well done. So Dawn, no questions, but someone's done it again, so there you go. No questions for you, but thanks again, particularly when you were feeling poorly. We really appreciate it. And if the attendees will indulge me, I'll just make a few closing comments. before we finish for the day. So I really hope you've enjoyed the Procurement Week at the Academy. There's certainly been lots of thought-provoking presentations and discussions, not least of which Dawn's. And as we close the event for another year, I'd really like to thank all of our speakers for giving up their time to share their knowledge and experiences with us. It's been excellent. And of course, thanks to each of you for joining us this week. Being online certainly didn't hinder the level of engagement, and the discussions have been fantastic, whether that's been people actually speaking or in the chat, and we've really learnt a lot from you, and hopefully that's been true for you too. So each year we choose an event theme that is relevant to the work you do, and for almost 18 months now there's only been one topic in everyone's mind, and that's why this year we really focused on post-COVID recovery. When we kicked off on Monday to talk about the climate emergency, we had 700 delegates joining us. On Wednesday, we discussed the hugely important community wealth building agenda, and we were able to hear firsthand from Scotland's first community wealth building council, North Ayrshire, about how they are building community wealth building into everything that they do. I mentioned in my opening comments, which seem a long time ago, that we're delighted to be working in partnership with the Scottish Government to deliver a community wealth building programme for councils, and we'll definitely share that with all of you later in the year. Yesterday, we took the time to focus on your professional knowledge and skills. So we had leadership in a post-COVID-19 world and procurement people of tomorrow, and it meant that there was something for everyone, so hopefully you enjoyed that day. And today we've been focusing on social care, which is hugely important locally, nationally, and one that's going through some major transformation. We've had some fantastic discussions today about the future policy direction, the role of commissioning and procurement, and of course, fair work principles. So there's been a wealth of useful information this week, and I hope that you've had many things that you can take back to your own organisation. If you missed anything, the good news is that the recordings of all the sessions will be available to you on our Academy website soon. So while we enjoy the opportunity to get together annually, Scotland Excel is of course here for you all year round. To help you with the challenges of our new and changing world, our frameworks are always there to support you in sourcing the goods and services that your organisation needs. And as I mentioned earlier in the week, we're really delighted about our passive housing, our new build housing framework, which allows support of Scotland's net zero aspirations. So you know all too well that the public and third sectors have been asked to do more with less for some time, or indeed forever. With the focus to local and national recovery, the role of your teams and the role of your organisation becomes more vital than ever. And we're delighted at the interest in our procurement and consultancy services, which we've been doing for some time, but we've now formally launched them for our members to support procurement teams in their growing role. And you'll be able to find out more information on these services on our new website, which will go live later this month, or even just give us a call, as we're always happy to tell you more. And that brings us to the close of Procurement Week at the Academy. It was wonderful to see you all. Thank you again for joining us, for using the hashtag and for your contributions. Who knows if next year we may actually be sitting face to face, or if we will be back online. With hybrid working now considered the future, maybe it will be a combination of the two. And one final thank you before we go, and that's to the team at Scotland Excel who made all this happen. It was a new way of working for them, and there's been a massive amount of hard work behind the scenes over the last 12 weeks. So I'm sure we all appreciate their efforts. So that's all for this year, folks. I really hope you enjoyed the week that you've spent with us, or the sessions that you've spent with us, and I wish you all a lovely weekend. Thanks very much.